The air tasted of iron that morning. It was a flavor I had come to associate with bad decisions, a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat like a prophecy of rust and blood. We were crouched, or rather, I was crouched, in the skeletal remains of a bookstore on the edge of the financial district. The general was attempting a crouch, which in a full suit of T-60 power armor looked less like an act of stealth and more like a refrigerator trying to kneel. The whine began. It was not a loud sound, not at first. It was a low, hydraulic hum, the sound of immense weight settling onto stressed servos. It vibrated through the floorboards, up through the soles of my leather boots, and into the bones of my legs. It was the sound of impossibility, of a walking tank pretending to be a shadow. "Ready, Silas." The voice of the general, Nate, crackled through the external speaker of his helmet. It was a voice filtered through steel and misplaced confidence, a voice that believed itself to be whispering. It was, of course, loud enough to startle a flock of birds 2 blocks away, had there been any birds left in this cursed city. I did not answer. I just gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture he could see from his elevated position. My throat was a knot of dry dust and unspoken truths. The most important truth was this: we were not a team. I was not his partner. I was damage control. I was the silent wave that washed away the evidence of the hurricane that followed. His mission was simple, as he had outlined it. Infiltrate the old stock exchange building, now a major gunner stronghold. Retrieve the pre-war schematics for a water purification system they had salvaged. Do it quietly. Like ghosts, he had said, clapping a gauntlet onto my shoulder that nearly drove me through the floor. The irony was a physical weight. He took a step. The whine escalated into a piercing screech of metal on metal, a sound that echoed through the ruined street like a death cry. The floorboards groaned in protest. A cascade of dust and plaster fell from the ceiling, pattering onto the shoulders of his armored shell. He paused, head cocked as if listening for a response. He was listening for the alarms, for the shouts of alerted guards. He heard nothing. Of course he heard nothing, because in the split second his hydraulics had screamed their protest to the heavens, I was already moving. My body was a blur of black leather and desperation. I vaulted over the rotted remains of a checkout counter, my feet making no sound on the broken tile. A gunner, drawn by the noise from a lookout post on the second floor, was peering over the railing. His face was a mask of confusion, his rifle held loosely. He was trying to place the sound, to rationalize the groan of a dying giant in the heart of a silent city. He never got the chance. The knife left my hand in a fluid, practiced motion. It was not a throw born of anger, but of necessity, a tool for a job. It spun end over end, a flicker of silver in the gloom, and buried itself in the soft tissue of his throat. He made a wet, gurgling sound, a noise mercifully swallowed by the ambient hum of the general's power core. He crumpled forward, his rifle clattering against the railing but not falling. I was already climbing, scaling the collapsed shelving like a ladder. I reached his body before it could slide into view, pulling him back into the shadows and retrieving my blade with a practiced twist. I looked down. The general had taken another step. The building trembled. "See, Silas?" His voice boomed, a mockery of a whisper. "Slow and steady. They have no idea we are here." I wiped the blade on the dead gunner's fatigues and descended back into the gloom. He was right. They had no idea. They had an idea that a building was collapsing somewhere nearby, or perhaps that a subway train had chosen this exact moment to derail itself after 2 centuries of silence. But they did not suspect a 2-man infiltration. The sheer absurdity of it was our greatest shield. My role was not one of stealth. It was a frantic, high-speed race against physics. The general was a walking, talking, whining diversion. He was the thunder, and it was my job to be the lightning that struck just before, ensuring no one was left to hear his approach. I was the silent accomplice to the loudest ninja in the history of the Commonwealth. We moved from the bookstore into the street. The plan was to cross the plaza and enter the stock exchange through a series of maintenance tunnels. Nate's idea. He had studied the maps, proud of his tactical acumen. He had not, however, factored in the acoustic properties of a street canyon paved with broken concrete and littered with hollowed-out cars. He took his first step onto the asphalt. The sound was monumental. It was a grinding, percussive thump screech that made the rusted husks of vehicles vibrate. A hubcap, loosened by the tremor, fell from a nearby Corvega and clattered onto the ground with a sound like a pistol shot. I was already sprinting. There were 2 guards on the rooftop across the plaza. I had spotted them an hour ago during my initial reconnaissance. They were lazy, confident in their position. The noise had them spooked. One was peering through a sniper scope sweeping the street. The other was speaking urgently into a radio. I could not get to them, not in time. This was a new kind of problem. A problem of distance. My knife was useless. My silenced pistol, a comfort in close quarters, would not be accurate enough. This required a different solution. It required misdirection. While Nate took another earth-shaking step, I slipped into the shadow of a city bus. My mind raced, cataloguing the environment. Debris. A loose girder on a nearby building. A precariously balanced air conditioning unit 3 stories up. I needed a bigger noise, a more plausible noise. Something to explain the symphony of industrial failure. That was my commanding officer. I found it. A rusted-out car, its hood agape. A tangle of wires spilling from its engine block. A little bit of jury rigging. A quick cross of wires from my portable battery pack. I was no mechanic, but I knew how to make a spark. The car's battery was long dead, but the gasoline in its tank was not. Fumes, stale and potent, still lingered. I tossed the battery pack, trailing thin copper wires, under the car and scrambled for cover behind a concrete barricade. As Nate's third step sent another tremor through the ground, I sent a final pulse of energy down the wire. The explosion was not large, but it was sharp and violent. The car's fuel tank ruptured with a deafening whoomph, sending a plume of black smoke and orange flame into the sky. It was a beautiful, terrible sound, a sound that completely, utterly drowned out the groan of the general's leg servos. The 2 snipers on the roof immediately swiveled their attention to the burning car. The radio chatter would now be about a freak explosion, a pocket of trapped gas, a radar attack, anything but the truth. The truth was too stupid to be believed. I watched as Nate, silhouetted against the fire, slowly, methodically, continued his stealthy advance across the plaza. He was a figure from some forgotten legend, a knight wading through fire and chaos, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the one ringing the dinner bell. He reached my position behind the barricade and crouched next to me, the movement causing a fresh wave of grinding protest from his armor. The heat from the fire washed over us. "Good thinking, that diversion," he said, his voice full of admiration for what he assumed was our shared plan. "Kept them looking the other way. We work well together." I just watched the flames. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. We did not work well together. He was a force of nature, and I was the poor fool running ahead of the avalanche. trying to convince everyone it was just a bit of a strong wind. The maintenance tunnel entrance was behind a locked grille, as the schematics had shown. The lock was a pre-war magnetic model, complex and delicate. It required a steady hand and a sensitive ear. It required silence. "I will handle this," I said, my voice a dry rasp. It was the first time I had spoken since we left our staging point. "Of course," Nate replied, his tone one of benevolent leadership. "You are the expert with these things." He stood behind me, a mountain of steel and humming machinery. I knelt before the lock, pulling out my tools, a set of probes, a bypass chip, a small amplifier to listen to the magnetic tumblers. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, trying to filter out the world and listen only to the delicate clicks within the mechanism. But there was no filtering out the general. His power core emitted a constant, low-frequency hum. It was the sound of 1,000 angry wasps trapped in a metal box. It buzzed in my teeth, in my skull. Every few seconds, the armor's cooling system would kick in with a soft hiss, a sound just loud enough to make me flinch. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and the ground itself seemed to sigh. I took a deep breath, trying to find my center. The lock was my world. The tumblers were the only thing that mattered. I inserted the probe. I felt the first magnet engage. A soft thunk. Good. I moved to the second. While keen clank. The general had decided to get a better look. He leaned forward, placing a gauntlet on the wall next to the grill for support. The sound was like a car crash in a library. My hand jerked, the probe slipping from the tumbler. I swore under my breath, a silent, venomous curse. "How is it coming along?" he asked, his voice echoing in the confined space of the alley. I did not look at him. I could not. If I looked at him, I might do something I would regret. I might, for instance, try to jam my lockpick into the exposed wiring of his helmet. "It is delicate," I managed to say, my voice tight. "It requires concentration." Right, concentration. He nodded, a gesture that made his helmet scrape against the brick wall with a sound like grinding teeth. I started again. The hum of the power core, the hiss of the vents, the groan of the servos as he shifted his weight again. The sounds were a physical assault. They were a wall between me and the lock. It was like trying to perform surgery in the middle of a foundry. My focus frayed. My hands, usually so steady, began to tremble. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine. This was not thievery. This was a form of torture. He was not just a liability. He was an active impediment to the very skills he was relying on. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each second was punctuated by a new sound from the suit of armor behind me. A click, a whir, a low, mournful groan as a piston readjusted. He was a one-man symphony of mechanical noise. I finally felt the last tumbler fall into place. The magnetic lock disengaged with a satisfying thud. The grille swung open, revealing the dark, yawning mouth of the tunnel. "Excellent work, Silas," Nate said, clapping me on the shoulder again. This time, I was prepared for it. I braced myself, and still, the impact sent a jolt of pain through my entire body. "Like a ghost," he added. I stared into the darkness of the tunnel. It would be worse down there. The enclosed space would amplify every sound, turning his every step into a percussive blast. My job was about to get much, much harder. And I knew, with a certainty that settled in my gut like a cold stone, that he would not notice a thing. He would walk through the echoing darkness, a titan in a tomb, and believe with all his heart that he was as silent as the dead. The tunnels were a labyrinth of rust and damp concrete. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, a scent that did not quite cover the faint odor of ozone and hot metal emanating from the general's armor. Every sound was magnified, distorted, turned into a monstrous version of itself. His footsteps were not just thuds. They were cannon shots that echoed down the corridor, seeming to come from all directions at once. The whine of his servos did not just pierce the air. It vibrated in the rebar of the walls, a resonant frequency that threatened to shake the very foundations of the building. We were following a series of maintenance conduits that ran beneath the main trading floor. According to Nate's maps, this route would bypass the heaviest concentrations of gunner patrols. The maps were correct about the route. The maps were silent, however, on the subject of acoustics. I moved 20 yards ahead of him at all times. It was a necessary buffer, a zone of impending doom that I had to sterilize before he could lumber into it. My existence had been reduced to a series of frantic, whispered calculations. How long would it take him to cover that distance? How many guards were between me and the next junction? What ambient noises could I create to mask the sound of a walking earthquake? A drip of water from a cracked pipe became a strategic asset. I would wait for him to pass under it, the rhythmic splash helping, in some small way, to break up the monolithic drone of his armor. A flickering fluorescent light fixture was not a sign of decay. It was an opportunity. Its incessant, angry buzz was a gift from whatever god of stealth still deigned to watch over fools like us. I would guide him towards it, using hand signals he interpreted as tactical caution. He thought I was pointing out potential ambush spots. I was pointing out noise cover. We came to a junction. One corridor led straight ahead, the other branched off to the right. My own reconnaissance told me the right-hand path was a dead end, a collapsed section of tunnel. But it also had a large functioning ventilation fan at its entrance, its blades churning the stale air with a steady, roaring rhythm. The straight path was the correct one, but it was silent as a grave. Nate paused, looking to me for guidance. Which way, specialist? This was a test, not of my knowledge of the layout, but of my commitment to this farce. The logical choice was to point him straight ahead. The sane choice was to abort the mission, to tell him this was impossible. I chose the third option, the option of the enabler. I pointed to the right, towards the roaring fan. He nodded sagely. A flanking maneuver. Good. They will expect a direct approach. He had no idea. He genuinely believed this was a cunning tactical decision, a feint to throw off our non-existent pursuers. He did not understand that I was not guiding him towards the objective. I was guiding him towards the noise. He turned and began his lumbering walk down the dead-end corridor. The roar of the fan swallowed the sound of his armor almost completely. For the first time in an hour, I could hear myself think. The silence, or what passed for it, was a profound relief. It was like surfacing after being held underwater. I did not follow him. I took the correct path, the silent path, moving with the speed and quiet that was my birthright. I had maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes to clear the next 100 feet of tunnel before he realized his flanking maneuver was leading him into a pile of rubble and turned back. The corridor ahead was lined with storage lockers. 2 gunners were stationed here, playing cards on an overturned barrel, their rifles leaning against the wall. They were bored, complacent. They had not heard the general thanks to the fan. They would never hear me. I moved like smoke. The first one died with a knife in his back, slumping forward onto the barrel without a sound. His partner looked up, his eyes widening in confusion, not yet registering the threat. My hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his cry. The second knife, my backup, slid cleanly between his ribs. I lowered him gently to the floor. The whole encounter took less than 5 seconds. I dragged the bodies into an empty locker and closed the door. I picked up the scattered cards, wiped a smear of blood from the barrel, and was back at the junction just as the general was turning around. The sound of his armor returned, a familiar, dreaded weight on the air. "Dead end," he stated, his voice tinny through the speaker. He was not annoyed. He seemed to view it as a successful reconnaissance of a blocked path. "Good to know. We will stick to the main route." He looked past me, down the now empty corridor. "Clear," he observed, as if his superior senses had scanned the area for threats. "You see, this stealth approach is working perfectly. We are a phantom." I looked at the locker where the 2 dead men were folded into the darkness. We were a phantom, yes, but he was the haunting, and I was the one hiding the bodies. We continued. The pattern repeated itself, a grim, exhausting rhythm. He would make a noise. I would sprint ahead. I would find the source of the inevitable investigation. A curious guard, a patrol diverted to check on the strange sounds. I would eliminate them. I would use the environment, my wits, my blades. I became an artist of silent preventative murder. A loose metal plate on the floor. I would spot it seconds before he did and steer him around it. A flock of rats that would scatter at his approach. I would chase them away down a side tunnel before he got close enough. A puddle of water that would splash loudly under his immense weight. I would kick loose debris into it, creating a makeshift bridge of rubble for him to walk on. He thought I was clearing the path of obstacles. I was soundproofing the entire damn building, one piece at a time. My senses became painfully acute. I could distinguish between the groan of his knee servo and the groan of his hip actuator. I could tell by the pitch of the whine whether he was accelerating or decelerating his pace. The suit of armor was no longer a single entity. It was a collection of individual traitorous components, each with its own unique voice, and I was learning their language. The mental toll was immense. The constant forward-thinking panic, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between continued phantomhood and a full-scale firefight. My mind was a whirlwind of tactical data, acoustic analysis, and a desperate, grinding prayer that he would not, for any reason, decide to jump. We reached the final ladder. It led up to a grate directly beneath the main control room of the trading floor. Our objective, the room I knew from my own scouting, was occupied. The gunner commander for this sector, a man named Valerius, and his 2 personal bodyguards. This would be the most difficult part. The room was small. The targets were high value and alert, and the only way in was a vertical metal ladder. "I will go first," I whispered, my voice raw. "I will secure the room." "No," the general said, his voice firm. The finality in it chilled me. "We do this together. We are a team. I will take point. My armor can absorb the first hit if things go wrong." He did not understand. If things went wrong, they would not be shooting at him. They would be shooting at the source of the sound. He was thinking in terms of combat. I was still desperately trying to avoid it. He began to climb the ladder. Each step was a percussive symphony of disaster. The metal rungs groaned and bent under his weight. His gauntlets scraped against the sides of the shaft with a sound like a dying car engine. The whine of his power core, trapped in the enclosed space, became a physical pressure against my eardrums. I closed my eyes. It was over. There was no way the men in the room above had not heard this. They would be waiting for him, rifles aimed, a dozen grenades ready to drop down the shaft. Our stealth mission had reached its loud, inevitable conclusion. I followed him up the ladder, My movement slow, resigned. My hand rested on the grip of my pistol. The time for knives was over. The time for noise had come. When his helmet breached the level of the floor, I expected a hail of gunfire. I braced for the shout of an alarm, the concussive blast of a grenade. Nothing. I climbed the last few rungs and peered over the edge. The scene in the control room was one of bizarre, frozen confusion. Valerius and his 2 guards were standing around the grate, their weapons lowered. They were not looking down at us. They were looking at each other, their faces a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Is that your stomach again, Marcus?" Valerius hissed, his voice a low growl. "I told you not to eat the reconstituted pork." The guard named Marcus looked offended. "That was not me. I thought it was the generator." The 3rd guard pointed a thumb at the ceiling. "It is the pipes. This whole building is falling apart. I have been hearing it all morning, grinding and groaning. It is a death trap." The general, with agonizing slowness, pulled himself up through the opening. The final movement was accompanied by a hydraulic sigh so loud it made the terminals on the desks rattle. The 3 gunners stared. Their brains, which had been so willing to invent plausible explanations for the impossible sounds, were now confronted with the impossible truth. A man in a full suit of power armor was climbing out of their floor. There was a moment of perfect crystalline silence. The hum of the armor, the buzz of the terminals, the drip of water in the tunnels below, it all faded away. There was only the sight of this metal giant rising from the ground and the stunned, uncomprehending faces of the men who were about to die. Nate, of course, interpreted this silence as success. He raised a finger to the front of his helmet, a gesture for silence that was about an hour too late. "They never even heard us," he whispered. Then the shooting started, but not from them. The general, true to his nature as a walking tank, opened fire first. The roar of his minigun in the enclosed space was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a physical force, a wave of sound that hammered me back down the ladder a few rungs. The 3 gunners were torn apart before they could even raise their rifles. The control room, a moment ago a place of quiet conversation, became a charnel house of shredded metal, shattered glass, and blood. The general ceased firing. The sudden silence was deafening. The smell of cordite and cooked meat filled the air. He turned, his helmeted face looking down at me. The single red eye of his headlamp cut through the dust and smoke. "Objective secured," he announced, his voice calm, professional, as if this had been the plan all along. Minimal resistance. The stealth approach paid off. I climbed back into the room, my ears ringing, my body numb. I looked at the carnage. I looked at the smoking barrel of his weapon. I looked at him, standing there like a monument to his own delusion. He had not heard their conversation. He had not seen their confusion. He had only seen targets, and he had eliminated them. In his mind, the mission was a flawless victory. He walked over to the main terminal, his boots crunching on glass and shell casings. The whine and clank of his armor was the only sound in the room. He began downloading the schematics. I stood there, in the quiet aftermath of the noise, and I understood. I was not just damage control. I was the keeper of the myth. My silence, my frantic, invisible work, was what allowed him to believe he was a ghost, a whisper in the dark. I was the architect of his reality, and his reality was a lie so profound, so complete, that it was indistinguishable from the truth. The schematics were secured on a small holotape. The general ejected it from the terminal with a decisive click and tucked it into a compartment on his armor. The mission, by his metrics, was over. Now came the exfiltration, a prospect that filled me with a unique and weary dread. Getting in had been a frantic ballet of preventative action. Getting out, with every gunner in the stronghold now fully aware of a massive firefight in their command center, would be a different kind of hell. "We will go out the way we came," Nate declared, his voice resonating with the unshakable confidence of a man who has never had to clean up his own mess. "They will not expect us to retrace our steps. We will slip out before they can mount a proper response." He seemed to have already forgotten the cataclysmic noise of his minigun. In his mind, the firefight had been a contained surgical event, a brief and necessary departure from the primary stealth protocol. He did not grasp that he had just kicked a hornet nest the size of a city block with a steel-toed boot. I did not argue. Arguing was pointless. It would be like trying to explain the concept of color to a rock. His perception was his reality, and my job was to make sure reality did not intrude upon it too forcefully. "Lead the way, General," I said, my voice flat. He nodded, pleased with my obedience, and turned to lower himself back into the maintenance shaft. The process was, if anything, louder than his ascent. The scraping of his armor against the metal ladder, the groaning of the rungs, the constant hydraulic adjustments. It was a cacophony that served as our official announcement to the entire gunner population. "We are here. We are leaving. Please form an orderly mob." I followed him down, my senses on a razor's edge. I could already hear it, the distant but distinct sound of shouting, the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots on concrete. They were coming. They were not just mounting a response, they were converging on our location with predictable, violent intent. The General, of course, heard nothing. The internal dampeners of his helmet, combined with the noise of the suit itself, rendered him functionally deaf to anything less than a nearby explosion. It was a blessing and a curse. His obliviousness kept him calm, but it also made him a walking death trap for anyone in his vicinity. We reached the bottom of the ladder and began to retrace our steps through the tunnels. The fan I had used for cover was still roaring, a small mercy, but the relative quiet it provided was now filled with a new tension. I knew what was coming. He did not. My role shifted. I was no longer just a soundproofer. I was now a scout, a point man, and a rear guard, all at once. I would sprint ahead, not just to clear the path, but to lay traps. A simple tripwire connected to a frag grenade, placed just around a corner. A strategically weakened ceiling support that I could bring down with a single, well-aimed shot from my silenced pistol. My work was no longer about preventing noise. It was about preparing for it. We passed the locker where I had hidden the bodies of the two card players. I resisted the urge to look. There was no time for reflection. As we neared the tunnel exit, I could hear them clearly now. A squad of at least 6 gunners, setting up a defensive position in the alley, right outside the grill I had so painstakingly picked. They were waiting for us. I held up a hand, a gesture for him to halt. He stopped, the whine of his servos dropping a few decibels. "What is it?" he whispered, his voice a loudspeaker of inquiry. "Do you sense something?" I sensed 6 men with automatic rifles who were about to turn us into a fine red mist. "Ambush," I mouthed, pointing towards the exit. He peered into the darkness, his headlamp cutting a bright, obvious cone of light. "I do not see anything." Of course he did not. They were outside, using the exit as a fatal funnel. "We need another way out," I said, my mind racing. "A different exit." "Nonsense," he countered, his voice firm. "We do not retreat. We advance. They have the advantage now, but we have the element of surprise." I stared at him, dumbfounded. the element of surprise. We had announced our presence with a symphony of grinding gears and a minigun solo. The only thing that would surprise them is if we came out juggling. "General," I began, trying to inject a note of reason into the conversation. "They are fortified. They are expecting us. It is a choke point." "Exactly," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. He patted the minigun mounted on his arm. "And this is the perfect tool for clearing a choke point. Stand back, Silas. I will handle this." He did not wait for a reply. He began his advance on the tunnel exit. Each step was a thunderous declaration of his intent. Thump, screech, whine. The gunners outside did not even need to see him to know he was coming. They just had to listen. I saw the plan in his posture. A classic breach. He would burst through the grill and open fire, relying on the shock and awe of a man in power armor to overwhelm the enemy. It was a suicidal plan. They would cut him down before he could even raise his weapon. His armor was tough, but it was not invincible. Enough concentrated fire at the joints, at the visor, at the fusion core on his back. I had to do something. I could not stop him, but I could change the equation. As he lumbered past me, I broke from the tunnel into a small, perpendicular maintenance shaft I had noticed earlier. It was a tight squeeze, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It was filled with pipes and cobwebs, and it stank of stagnant water. I moved through it, my back scraping against the rough concrete, following a path that ran parallel to the main tunnel. I could hear him drawing closer to the exit. I could also hear the gunners, their voices clearer now. They were ready. "On my mark," one of them said. I found what I was looking for. A small, rust-covered service hatch, level with the floor of the alley. It was probably a drain cover or an access point for the sewer system. It was also, I noted with a surge of adrenaline, located about 10 feet behind the gunner position. I pushed on the hatch. It was heavy, sealed by years of rust and grime. I put my shoulder into it, grunting with the effort. It refused to budge. I could hear the general reach the grill. I heard the metallic clang as he grabbed the bars. I drew my combat knife and jammed it into the seam of the hatch, using it as a lever. I put all my weight on it, my muscles screaming in protest. The knife blade bent, threatening to snap. "Come on," I thought. A desperate, silent plea. I heard the screech of tortured metal as the general ripped the grill from its hinges. "Contact," a gunner shouted from the alley. The hatch gave way. It shifted with a groan of rusted metal, opening just enough for me to squeeze through. I emerged into the alley behind the line of gunners. They were all focused on the tunnel mouth, their rifles spitting fire. The alley was a storm of noise and light. Muzzle flashes, the roar of automatic weapons, the ricochet of bullets off the general's armor. They had not noticed me. I rose from my crouch, a knife in each hand. The closest gunner was so intent on the target in front of him that he never saw the blade that slid into his kidney. He gasped, his fingers spasming on the trigger, sending a burst of rounds into the ceiling before he collapsed. One down. The gunner next to him turned at the sound, his eyes wide with shock. He opened his mouth to shout a warning. My second knife silenced him permanently, burying itself in his chest. 2 down. The remaining 4 realized what was happening. They started to turn, to bring their weapons to bear on the new threat. But they were too slow. They were soldiers, trained for firefights. I was a thief, trained for exploiting moments of distraction. And the general, for all his faults, was the greatest distraction in the Commonwealth. I was a whirlwind of motion. I grabbed the rifle from the second man I had killed. a battered but functional assault rifle. I did not aim. I just pointed and fired, a short, controlled burst into the back of the third gunner. He went down. The other three were turning on me now. But in that same moment, the general, having weathered the initial storm of bullets, stepped out of the tunnel. He was a vision of righteous fury, his minigun spinning up to full speed. The gunners were caught in a crossfire. They were trapped between a ghost and a golem. They hesitated, their training failing them in the face of this impossible situation. Do they engage the metal giant in front, or the silent killer behind? That hesitation cost them their lives. The general's minigun roared. My purloined rifle spat fire. The three remaining gunners were caught in a storm of lead from two directions. They were stitched, torn, and annihilated in a matter of seconds. The alley fell silent, save for the ticking of cooling gun barrels and the ever-present hum of the general's armor. Smoke and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Nate surveyed the scene. He saw the dead gunners, the smoking rifles, the carnage. He saw me standing over a body, a rifle in my hands. He lowered his minigun, a curl of smoke rising from its barrels. "Good work, Silas," he said, his voice filled with sincere, oblivious praise. "Excellent covering fire. You pinned them down, and I've finished them off. We make a hell of a team." He turned and began to walk down the alley towards the street, leaving me alone with the bodies. I looked at the chaos I had created, the violence I had unleashed, all to maintain the fiction of his competence. I had not provided covering fire. I had saved his life. I had salvaged his suicidal plan. I had been his partner, his point man, his assassin, his guardian angel, and he thought I had just pinned them down. I dropped the rifle. It clattered on the pavement. I was so tired. It was a weariness that went beyond muscle and bone. It was a fatigue of the soul. I followed him out of the alley. The mission was a success. The schematics were safe. The Minutemen had won a great victory, and only I and 7 dead men knew the truth of how it had been accomplished. The return to the castle was a slow, arduous journey. We moved through the ruins of the city, a titan and his shadow. The urgency was gone, replaced by the dull, grinding reality of the long walk home. The general was in high spirits, a mood that manifested as a slight increase in the tempo of his thudding footsteps and the occasional booming comment on the flawless execution of our mission. "They never saw it coming," he would say, gesturing with a massive gauntlet at a ruined skyline. "A surgical strike, in and out. That is the key to this kind of warfare. Precision, finesse." I would just nod, my eyes scanning the rubble for the next potential threat, my ears tuned to the symphony of his armor. The whine of the servos had become the soundtrack to my life. I no longer noticed it as a distinct noise. It was simply the baseline hum of my existence, the background radiation against which all other sounds were measured. When we finally saw the walls of the castle, rising from the muck and ruin of the coast, a sense of relief washed over me. It was not the relief of a soldier returning home, but the relief of a stagehand at the end of a very long, very dangerous play. The curtain was coming down. I could finally stop holding up the scenery. The reception was, as I had expected, triumphant. The Minutemen on watch duty cheered as the general strode through the main gate, his T-60 armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. He was a symbol of their renewed strength, a walking embodiment of the old world's power brought to bear on the new world's problems. They saw the hero. They saw the victory. They did not see the trail of silent bodies and carefully managed chaos that lay behind him. Ronnie Shaw, the grizzled veteran who ran the castle's defenses, greeted him with a rare smile. Heard there was some trouble over at the exchange. Sounds like you gave those gunner bastards a bloody nose. We did more than that, Ronnie, Nate said, his voice magnanimous. He held up the holotape. We secured the future of every settlement in this Commonwealth. These are the schematics for the industrial water purifiers. A fresh round of cheers went up. People slapped him on the armored back, their hands making dull, clanging sounds. He was their savior, their leader. I slipped away from the celebration, melting into the shadows of the armory. No one noticed my departure. I was not part of the victory. I was part of the process, the unseen, unacknowledged mechanism that made the victory possible. My reward was not cheering or backslapping. My reward was survival. My reward was the brief, blessed silence that came with being away from him. I stripped off my gear, my movements economical and practiced. I cleaned my knives, the motion soothing, rhythmic. I disassembled my silenced pistol, checking each component for wear. These were my tools. These were the only things I could truly rely on. They did not lie. They did not have delusions. A well-oiled slide, a sharpened edge. These were truths in a world of convenient fictions. Later, I was sitting on a crate, stitching a tear in my leather armor, when Preston Garvey approached me. He had that earnest, worried look on his face that seemed to be his default expression. "Silas," he said, his voice low. "I heard about the mission. That was impressive. Taking on the gunner headquarters with just 2 people." I did not look up from my work. "The general is very effective." Preston hesitated. He was one of the few people who seemed to see past the legend. He saw the man, and the man worried him. "He is," Preston agreed carefully. "But he is also loud." I was on radio duty. We were picking up seismic tremors all the way from here. At first, we thought it was a mole rat queen. I pulled the thread tight, the needle dipping in and out of the leather. "He gets the job done." "He does," Preston conceded. "But at what cost? We lost contact with one of our recon patrols near the exchange this morning. A good man, name of Arlen. He was supposed to be monitoring their movements. We have not heard from him since you 2 went in." My hands froze. Arlen. I knew him. A quiet man, good at his job. He would have been out there, watching, listening. He would have heard the general's approach from miles away. He would have been curious. He might have moved in for a closer look, trying to identify the source of the impossible noise. And he would have been spotted by a gunner patrol that had also been drawn by the noise. I did not know what had happened to Arlen, but I could make a very, very good guess. The chaos of the general's presence did not just affect the enemy. It radiated outwards, a circle of disruption that could catch anyone in its path. We were not a surgical strike. We were a blunt instrument, and the whole world was collateral damage. "I did not see him," I said. It was the truth. Preston sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I know, I worry, Silas. The general is a great man, a hero, but he does not see the world the way the rest of us do. He sees a battlefield. He does not always see the people on it." He was wrong. Nate did not see a battlefield. He saw a stage, and he was the star of the show. The rest of us were just extras. "I will keep an eye on him," I said. It was a promise I had already made to myself, a burden I had already accepted. Preston nodded, seemingly reassured, and left me to my work. I sat there for a long time, the needle and thread forgotten in my hand. I thought about Arlen, a ghost created by a man who thought he was a ghost. That night, the general sought me out. He found me on the battlements, looking out over the dark, churning water. He was out of his armor, a rare sight. In his simple vault suit, he looked smaller, more human, more vulnerable. The absence of the constant whine was so profound, it was almost a sound in itself. "There you are," he said. He stood beside me, his hands on the stone parapet. For a moment, we were just two men, staring into the darkness. "I wanted to thank you, Silas," he said, his voice quiet, sincere, stripped of its usual booming confidence. "Properly, I know I can be focused, single-minded, but I am not blind. I see what you do. You are good at your job, the best I've ever seen." I waited. This was new territory. "That move in the alley," he continued, drawing their fire while I flanked them from the tunnel. "It was brilliant, pure instinct. You anticipated my plan perfectly." My mind flashed back to the reality of that moment. Me, scrambling out of a sewer hatch, killing two men from behind, creating a crossfire out of sheer desperation to prevent him from getting himself killed. He saw it as me following his lead. He had rewritten the events in his memory to fit his narrative. The narrative where he was always the strategist, always in control. "We are a good team," he said, and this time it sounded less like a delusion and more like a deeply held belief. "With you watching my back, and this," he gestured to the castle around us, "as our base, we can bring real order to the Commonwealth. We can build something that lasts." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a genuine, powerful hope. It was the hope of a man who had lost everything and was now determined to build it all back, bigger and better than before. He was not just a leader, he was a true believer. And his first and most fervent disciple was himself. In that moment, I understood the true nature of my role. I was not just protecting him from the enemy. I was protecting him from the truth that his plans were flawed, that his methods were reckless, that his success was built on a foundation of my frantic, bloody improvisation. He needed to believe he was the perfect general, the flawless strategist, because the weight of leadership, the weight of all the lives that depended on him, was too much for a mere man to bear. He needed the armor, both literally and figuratively, and I was the one who kept it polished. I was the one who tightened the bolts and silenced the squeaky joints. My job was to maintain the machine, both the one he wore and the one he had built in his own mind. Because Preston was right. Nate was a hero. He inspired people. He gave them hope. The Minutemen were rallying around him, building a better world, one settlement at a time. And if the price of that hope was a lie, a grand, all-encompassing delusion that only I was privy to, was it not a price worth paying? Who was I to take that away from them? Who was I, a thief and a killer, to tell these people that their savior was a well-meaning fool who was going to get them all killed if I was not there to shepherd him? The answer was simple. I was no one. Just a shadow. Just a ghost. "Yes, General," I said, my voice as steady as the stone beneath my hands. "We are a good team." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression of relief and camaraderie. "I knew you saw it too." He clapped me on the shoulder, and this time, without the armor, it was just the gesture of a friend. It was the most dishonest thing I had ever felt. The weeks that followed settled into a grim routine. The general, emboldened by our success at the stock exchange, planned a series of similar covert operations. Each one was a new chapter in our shared delusion, a fresh ordeal for my nerves and my morality. We hit a raider-infested satellite array, a super mutant hive in a collapsed parking garage, and a synth-run listening post hidden in a church steeple. Each mission was the same. The general would insist on the T-60. The whining would begin. I would race ahead, a frantic spectre of violence and manipulation, silencing guards, creating diversions, soundproofing the world just enough to maintain the fiction of his stealth. I became a master of my craft. I learned to use the environment in ways I had never imagined. In the satellite array, I timed my movements to the slow, rhythmic sweep of the main dish, its powerful motors creating a grinding hum that masked his approach. In the parking garage, I triggered a series of small, controlled collapses in distant sections, creating percussive booms that drew the attention of the super mutants, who mistook the sounds for infighting. In the church, I climbed into the belfry and manually rang the great bronze bell, a deafening peal that covered his ascent and sent the synths into a state of tactical confusion. Nate, of course, saw these events as fortunate coincidences or a testament to his own impeccable timing. "Did you hear that, Silas?" he would say, as a ton of concrete collapsed 100 yards away. "Sounds like their infrastructure is failing. Good. We can use that to our advantage." He believed he was an opportunist, capitalizing on the chaos of the wasteland. He never understood that he was the chaos, and I was the one directing it. My skills evolved. I was no longer just a thief who was good with a knife. I was a psychologist, an engineer, a demolitionist. I learned to think not just one step ahead, but 10. I had to predict his movements, his likely paths, the specific noises his armor would make on different surfaces. I had to anticipate the reactions of our enemies, their patrol routes, their psychologies. Was this guard jumpy? Was that one lazy? Would a sudden noise make them investigate, or would it make them hunker down in fear? My life became a constant running calculation of acoustics, sight lines, and human fallibility. The Commonwealth was no longer a place of people and things. It was a soundscape, a complex tapestry of vibrations and echoes, and I was its conductor. The general was my orchestra, a loud, unruly, and utterly predictable brass section, and it was my job to compose a symphony of silence around him. The toll was immense. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour or two at a time. Every unexpected noise, a dropped tool in the workshop, a backfiring generator, would send a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I saw the world in terms of threat vectors and noise profiles. The friendly chatter in the castle's mess hall was a security risk. The laughter of children was a tactical liability. The others started to notice. Not the truth, of course. The truth was too absurd. But they noticed the change in me. "You are wound tight, Silas," Ronnie Shaw told me one afternoon, as I was meticulously charting patrol routes on a salvaged map. "You look like a man who is trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane." She had no idea how right she was. Preston Garvey would watch me with those worried eyes, occasionally offering me a tin of coffee or a piece of stale cram. "You are taking on too much," he would say. "Let someone else go with the general. Give yourself a rest." But I could not. Who else could do it? Who else would understand the delicate, insane dance that was required? If I sent another Minuteman with him, they would die. They would try to reason with him. They would fail to anticipate the consequences of a single, misplaced, whining footstep. They would be good soldiers, and they would be killed by their own commander's delusion. No, it had to be me. I was the only one. I was the high priest of this strange, violent religion, and only I knew the proper rituals to appease its noisy god. The breaking point, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion or a failed mission. It was a quiet moment, a small, insignificant detail that shattered the fragile peace I had made with my role. We were tasked with clearing a feral ghoul infestation from the old MedTech research facility. It was supposed to be a straightforward extermination job, not a stealth mission. For once, the general's armor and his penchant for loud violence would be an asset. I had actually looked forward to it. No sneaking, no frantic damage control. Just a simple, honest slaughter. We entered the facility, and the plan was for Nate to act as the anvil, drawing the ghouls to his position in the main lobby with the sound and fury of his presence, while I would be the hammer, moving through the labs and corridors, flanking them and picking them off. It started well. He strode into the lobby, his armor a beacon of noise, and the ghouls came pouring out of the woodwork, a tide of rotting flesh and mindless fury. They swarmed him, their claws scraping uselessly against his power armor. His minigun opened up, and the lobby became a maelstrom of blood and thunder. I did my part. I moved through the darkened labs, my silenced pistol dispatching the ghouls that hung back, the ones that tried to flank him. It was clean work. It was honest work. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a soldier, not a conspirator. We cleared the main floor and moved to the sub-levels. The infestation was thicker here. The ghouls were packed into the tight corridors, a writhing mass of bodies. The general was in his element, a steel behemoth wading through a river of monsters. Then, in a small, forgotten laboratory, I found it. A terminal, still functioning, its green screen glowing in the darkness. It contained the research notes of the facility's last scientists. I read through them, my stomach tightening with each entry. They were not just studying diseases. They were studying the FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, and they had been successful. They had created a modified strain, one designed to be airborne, to be contagious. The ghouls here were not just irradiated husks. They were carriers. The last entry was a frantic, terrified scrawl. Containment breach. God help us. It is in the air. The ventilation system. The ventilation system. The same system that was now circulating the dust and debris stirred up by our firefight. The same air that I was breathing. I looked at the general. He was protected, sealed inside his suit of armor, breathing filtered air. He was immune. I was not. A cold, clinical terror gripped me. Every breath I took was a potential death sentence. I had to get out. I had to tell him. I ran back to the corridor where he was fighting, my mind reeling. "General," I shouted, my voice hoarse. "We have to go. The air, it is contaminated." He did not hear me. The roar of his minigun, the screeching of the ghouls, the whine of his own armor. It was a wall of sound. I fired my pistol into the air, a desperate plea for attention. He did not even flinch. I ran to him, grabbing his arm. It was like grabbing a piece of moving factory equipment. He shrugged me off without even noticing, his attention focused on the tide of monsters. I was trapped. Trapped in a contaminated building with a man who could not hear me, a man whose own noise was drowning out the warning that could save my life. His greatest asset, his power and his fury, had become my prison. I had to get his attention. There was only one way. I had to get in front of him. I scrambled past him, into the thick of the ghouls. They turned on me, their rotting faces a nightmare of hunger. I fired my pistol, dropping the first two, but more came, clawing, biting. One of them raked its filthy claws across my arm, tearing through my armor and my skin. A burning pain shot through me, but it worked. The general saw me. He saw me surrounded, in trouble. His focus shifted. Silas. His voice, for once, cut through the chaos. He brought his weapon to bear, but he could not get a clear shot. I was in the middle of the horde. He did the only thing he could. He charged. He was a battering ram of solid steel. He crashed into the mass of ghouls, sending bodies flying. He created an opening, a path for me to escape. I scrambled back behind his position, my heart hammering, the wound on my arm burning like acid. He finished off the remaining ghouls with a final, sustained burst of fire. Then, silence. He turned to me, his red headlamp fixing on my position. "Are you all right? What were you thinking, running in there like that?" I clutched my arm, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked from my wound to the vents in the ceiling, the silent purveyors of a slow, inevitable death. "The FEV," I said, my voice trembling. "It is airborne. The whole facility is contaminated." He paused. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of his power core. He looked around the silent, corpse-strewn corridor. He looked at the vents. He looked at my wound. "Get behind me," he said, his voice stripped of all its usual bravado. It was the voice of a soldier, a protector. "We are leaving, now." He took point, his weapon ready, and we retreated from the facility. He moved with a purpose I had not seen before, a grim efficiency that had nothing to do with stealth or delusion. He was just a man, getting his wounded comrade out of a hot zone. When we emerged into the clean, irradiated air of the Commonwealth, I fell to my knees, gulping in breaths that did not taste of death and decay. He stood over me, a silent steel guardian. "We need to get you to a doctor," he said. I looked at the gash on my arm. The ghouls in this place were not just ghouls. They were carriers. A scratch was not just a scratch. I had spent months protecting him from the truth, and in the end, his delusion, his inability to hear, his all-consuming noise, had led me to this. I had been so focused on managing his reality that I had failed to pay attention to my own. The enabler had become the victim. The shadow had been caught in the fire. He did not know the full extent of the danger. He thought I was wounded. He did not understand that I might be infected, that I might be carrying a plague. And in that moment, I could not bring myself to tell him. I had a new secret to keep, a new, terrible truth to hide. And this one was not his. It was mine. It was growing in my blood, a silent ticking clock, and it was the one thing his noise could not drown out. Dr. Amari at the memory den was my only hope. I could not go to the castle's medic. I could not risk the truth getting out, the panic it would cause. The story we gave was simple. A ghoul scratch on a routine clearing operation. Plausible, common, nothing to raise an alarm. Nate, to his credit, was consumed with a quiet, burning guilt. He stood in the corner of Amari's makeshift clinic in Good Neighbor, a mountain of silent steel, watching as she cleaned and bandaged my wound. He had taken off his helmet, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen before. It was not confidence. It was not oblivious pride. It was fear. "It was my fault," he said, his voice a low rumble, after Amari had given me a powerful cocktail of antibiotics and anti-rad medication. "I should have listened. I should have heard you." I looked at him, at this man stripped bare of his delusions, and I felt a flicker of something I had not expected. Pity. He was not a monster. He was not a fool. He was a man trying to hold the world together with his bare hands, and he was terrified of failing. The armor, the noise, the bravado, it was all a shield against that fear. "It was a chaotic situation, General," I said, the lie coming easily, a well-worn groove in my mind. "No one is to blame." He did not look convinced. Amari finished her work. "The wound is clean," she said, her voice calm and professional. "But these things can be unpredictable. You will need to monitor it. Any changes, discoloration, numbness, unusual growth, you come back to me. Immediately." The words hung in the air. Unusual growth. the calling card of the FEV. Nate insisted on paying her, handing over a small mountain of caps that he produced from a pouch on his armor. Then he led me out, his gauntlet resting gently on my shoulder, guiding me through the filthy streets of Goodneighbor. The usual whine and grind of his armor seemed different now, less like a nuisance, more like a funeral dirge. We did not return to the castle. He took me to a small, quiet settlement he had established, a place called Taffington Boathouse. It was peaceful, remote. He said I needed to rest, to recover. What he meant was that he needed to watch me. He was afraid for me, and afraid of what I might become. The days that followed were a strange, quiet purgatory. I was quartered in the main house, while he stayed in, his power armor standing guard outside like a sentinel. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He just stood there, his red eye a single baleful star in the night, watching over me. He would bring me food, water, medical supplies, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice always low, always tinged with a new, terrible sobriety. The delusion was gone. The MedTech facility had shattered it. He had been confronted with a truth so stark, so undeniable. His own deafness had almost killed me, that his mind could no longer maintain the fiction. The ninja was dead. All that was left was the tank and the man inside it. And in the absence of his delusion, a new, more terrifying reality emerged. He was lost. Without the comforting narrative of his own infallibility, he was adrift. He would spend hours just staring at his hands, at the massive, articulated gauntlets, as if seeing them for the first time. He was a man waking from a long dream, and he did not like the world he saw. My arm became the focus of all our unspoken fears. I would unwrap the bandages several times a day, my heart pounding, and inspect the wound. It was healing, but slowly. Too slowly. The skin around the edges was pale, unnaturally white. It did not hurt. In fact, I was losing feeling in that arm entirely. I did not tell him this. I would just rewrap the bandages and say, "It looks better today." He would not, his face a mask of false hope. We were trapped in a new kind of lie. Before, I had maintained his delusion. Now, we were both complicit in a lie of denial, pretending that everything was going to be fine, that the antibiotics were working, that the world would go back to normal, but it would not. I could feel it. A change was happening inside me. It was subtle at first, a strange, metallic taste in my mouth, the same one I associated with his bad decisions. A heightened sense of smell, the scent of the river muck outside becoming almost overpowering. My vision seemed sharper in the dark, and the silence. The silence was the worst part. Without a mission, without the constant grind of his armor in my ears, my mind was left to its own devices, and it turned inward, focusing on the slow, silent poison in my veins. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat. The numbness in my arm had spread to my shoulder. I unwrapped the bandages in the dark. The wound was no longer just a scar. The skin around it was shifting. It was taking on a greenish, mottled hue. It looked like old, bruised fruit. I knew then. The antibiotics had failed. The FEV was winning. I got up and walked to the window. He was out there, a dark shape against the moonlit water, his power core a faint, humming pulse. He was still watching, still protecting me. I thought about my options. I could run, disappear into the wasteland, let the change take me, become another monster howling in the dark. I could end it myself. My pistol was on the nightstand, a quick, clean solution. Or I could tell him the truth. I walked out of the boathouse. The night air was cool on my skin. He turned as I approached, his movement stiff. "Silas, you should be resting." I stopped in front of him and held up my arm, letting the bandages fall away. In the faint glow of his headlamp, the discolored, mutated flesh was stark and undeniable. "The medicine is not working," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was beyond fear now. I was in a place of cold, clear certainty. He stared at my arm. The hum of his power core seemed to falter, to skip a beat. He reached out a gauntlet, as if to touch it, then stopped, his metal fingers hovering in the air. "No," he whispered. The word was a breath, a prayer. "Amari said, she said it was clean." "She was wrong," I said, "or the FEV was stronger than she thought." He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between us, thick and heavy. He was the general. He was the leader. He was supposed to have the answers. But there were no answers for this. There was no mission plan, no tactical solution, just a slow biological reality. "What do we do?" he finally asked. His voice was small, the voice of a man, not a general. He was asking me, the shadow, the enabler. He was asking me for orders. This was the ultimate irony. For months, I had been his silent guide, his invisible hand. I had directed his chaos, managed his delusion, all from the shadows. Now, with the truth laid bare, he was turning to me, not as a subordinate, but as an equal, as someone who might know the way forward. I looked at my arm, at the creeping alien transformation. I looked at him, at the metal shell he had hidden inside for so long. The armor had been his prison and my curse. But it was also a symbol of something else: power, technology. The old world's desperate, arrogant belief that it could conquer anything, even nature, even death. And in that moment, I saw a path, not a cure, not a solution, but a chance, a terrible, desperate, insane chance. "There is a place," I said, my voice finding a new strength, "an old research facility, WestTech. They were the ones who created the FEV. They had research, samples, a viral lab. If there is a cure or a treatment, or even just an answer, it would be there." It was a long shot, a suicide mission. WestTech was a legendary death trap, a place rumored to be crawling with super mutants and forgotten security systems. It was a journey deep into the heart of the plague that was killing me. Nate looked at me, his face illuminated by the glow of his own headlamp. I could see the conflict in his eyes. The soldier in him recognized the folly of the mission. The man in him, the man consumed by guilt, saw it as the only path to redemption. "Then that is where we are going," he said, his voice firm again, the general returning. He was a man who needed a mission. I had just given him one. He looked down at his own armor, at the machine that had caused all of this. "But we will not be going like we did before," he said. He reached up, and with a hiss of pneumatic seals, the chest plate of his armor opened. He began to unlatch the various clasps and connections. "What are you doing?" I asked. "My way does not work," he said, his voice grim. He stepped out of the main chassis, leaving the hulking metal suit standing empty, like a shed skin. He was just a man in a vault suit again, but this time he did not look small. He looked free. "We need to be fast, and we need to be quiet," he said. "Truly quiet. Your way, Silas. You will lead. You will teach me." He was surrendering his power, his shield, his delusion. He was placing his trust and my life entirely in my hands. The dynamic between us had been irrevocably broken, and from the pieces, something new was being built. A partnership, a real one. I looked at him, at the empty suit of armor, at my own monstrous arm. The old life was over. The lies were done. "All right, General," I said. "Let's go be ghosts." And for the first time, I actually believed it might be possible. The journey to WestTech was a reversal of everything that had come before. We traveled light, carrying only what we needed: my silenced pistol, his combat rifle, a handful of medical supplies, and the grim, unspoken knowledge that we were racing against a clock embedded in my own cells. Without the T-60, Nate was just a man. A strong, capable man, to be sure, a soldier from another time, but he was vulnerable. He made noise. He was not a natural shadow. My role was no longer damage control. It was instruction. "Your feet," I would whisper, as we moved through the skeletal remains of a city. "Roll from the heel to the toe. Do not plant your weight flat." He would try, his movements clumsy at first, then gradually more fluid. He was a good student, driven by a desperate, focused guilt. He learned to watch for loose gravel, for broken glass. He learned to use the wind to cover the sound of his breathing. He learned the language of silence, a language he had been deaf to for so long. I was a harsh teacher. I had to be. A single mistake could bring a horde of feral ghouls or a super mutant patrol down on us. There was no room for error. There was no hulking suit of armor to absorb the consequences. "You are still breathing too loud," I would hiss, as we hid behind a rusted-out car, listening to the guttural chatter of mutants nearby. "Control it. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, deliberate." He would nod, his eyes wide with concentration, and force his body into stillness, into quiet. The change in him was profound. Without the armor, he was forced to see the world as I saw it. He noticed the details: the scuff marks on the floor that indicated a patrol route, the faint smell of cooking meat that warned of a nearby raider camp, the subtle shift in the wind that could carry a sound for miles. He was becoming aware. And as he learned my ways, I began to see him differently. He was not just a symbol or a liability. He was a person. He told me stories of his old life, of his wife, Nora, and his son, Sean. He spoke of them with a raw, aching grief that was almost unbearable to listen to. He had been a soldier, yes, but he had also been a husband and a father. He was fighting not just for the Commonwealth, but for the memory of a world that had been stolen from him. "She would have liked you, I think," he said one night, as we sat by a small, smokeless fire. "You are a survivor. She was too." His vulnerability was a disarming thing. It chipped away at the wall of resentment and exhaustion I had built around myself. I found myself telling him about my own past, about growing up in the wasteland, learning to steal before I could read, about the years spent living in the margins, trusting no one. We were two broken men, from two different worlds, bound together by a shared, desperate mission. The roles of general and specialist, of Titan and Shadow, had dissolved. We were just Nate and Silas, and we were running out of time. The arm was getting worse. The green discoloration was spreading, a faint web of veins now visible beneath the skin. The numbness was total. I could punch a concrete wall with that hand and feel nothing. At night, I would be woken by terrible, twitching muscle spasms, my arm moving with a life of its own. I did my best to hide it from him, but he saw. In the grim set of his jaw, in the way he would sometimes look at my arm and then quickly look away, I saw my own fear reflected back at him. We reached the glowing sea, a vast, irradiated hellscape that stood between us and our destination. It was a place where the very air was poison. We had no power armor, only a few precious doses of Rad-X and Radaway. To cross it was suicide. "We cannot go through," Nate said, his voice flat, as we stood on a ridge overlooking the green, shimmering wasteland. "We will be dead in an hour." "We will not go through it," I said. "We will go under it." I had heard stories, whispers from traders and scavengers, a network of old pre-war tunnels deep underground, shielded from the worst of the radiation. They were said to be unstable, flooded, filled with things that had not seen the sun in 200 years. But they were our only chance. Finding the entrance took a full day. It was a collapsed section of highway leading down into a gaping, dark maw. The air that rose from it was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else, something ancient and predatory. "You first?" Nate asked, a hint of gallows humor in his voice. "I first," I confirmed, and began the descent. The tunnels were a nightmare. They were tight, claustrophobic, and slick with a strange, glowing fungus that provided the only light. The radiation levels were lower, but not zero. The steady crackle of my Geiger counter was a constant companion, and we were not alone. We found tracks, huge three-toed prints pressed into the mud. Death claws, the apex predators of the wasteland. Down here in the dark, they would be even more dangerous. We moved in absolute silence now. Every step was a prayer. Every sound was a potential death sentence. All the lessons I had taught Nate were put to the ultimate test. He moved like a wraith, his rifle held at the ready, his eyes scanning the oppressive darkness. We found a nest, a huge cavern littered with the bones of unfortunate creatures that had wandered into these tunnels. In the center of the cavern, a massive matriarch deathclaw lay sleeping, her breaths a low, rumbling growl that shook the very rock. There was no way around her. The tunnel continued on the other side of the cavern. We had to go through. "I will create a diversion," Nate whispered, his mouth close to my ear. "Draw her away. You run for the tunnel. Do not wait for me." It was a soldier's plan, a sacrificial plan. "No," I whispered back. "There is another way." I pointed up. The cavern ceiling was a mess of stalactites, some of them massive, hanging like stone daggers over the sleeping creature. And running along the wall, near the ceiling, was a series of old, rusted maintenance pipes. It was a crazy idea, a thief's idea. He understood immediately. He just nodded. The climb was treacherous. The pipes were slick with moisture, and they groaned under our weight. We moved with agonizing slowness, our muscles screaming with the strain. Below us, the deathclaw stirred in its sleep, its massive head twitching. We were halfway across when it happened. My left arm, my good arm, slipped on a patch of slime. I lost my grip, my body swinging wildly. My feet scrabbled for purchase on the rock wall. I managed to stop my fall, but not before my boots sent a shower of small pebbles clattering down onto the cavern floor. The deathclaw's eyes snapped open. They glowed in the dark, 2 points of malevolent intelligence. It rose to its full, terrifying height, its head swiveling, trying to locate the source of the sound. It saw us. It let out a roar that was pure, condensed rage, a sound that hammered at my bones. It lunged at the wall, its massive claws scraping gouges in the rock, trying to climb, trying to reach us. We were exposed. We were dead. But Nate was already moving. He was not panicking. He was a soldier again. He raised his rifle, not at the deathclaw, but at the ceiling. He fired a single, carefully aimed shot at the base of the largest stalactite, the one hanging directly over the creature. The bullet sparked off the rock. A crack appeared. The stalactite shuddered. The deathclaw roared again and swiped at the wall, its claws coming within inches of my feet. Nate fired again, and again. The cracks widened. The massive spear of rock began to groan, to shift. With a sound like the world breaking in two, the stalactite tore loose from the ceiling. It fell, a ton of silent geological fury. It did not hit the Deathclaw. It missed by a few feet, shattering on the cavern floor with a deafening crash. But it did its job. The creature, startled by the sudden, violent impact, jumped back, its attention momentarily diverted. It was the opening we needed. "Go!" Nate yelled, his voice echoing in the cavern. We did not need to be told twice. We scrambled the rest of the way across the pipes, dropped down into the far tunnel, and ran. We did not stop running until our lungs were on fire and the sound of the enraged Deathclaw's roars had faded behind us. We collapsed against a rock wall, gasping for air. We were alive. We had survived. Nate looked at me, a grim smile on his face. "Good plan," he said, breathing heavily. A bit noisy at the end there. I looked at my good arm, which was trembling from the strain. Then I looked at my left arm, the bad arm, the one that had been numb, useless. It was not trembling. It was steady. And as I watched, the greenish discolored skin seemed to pulse. A faint, internal light, like a firefly trapped under the skin. The FEV was not just killing me. It was changing me. And in that moment of terror, on that pipe, it had given me strength. The arm that should have been my weakest link had held firm. I did not know if I should be horrified or grateful. We pressed on, and a day later, we emerged from the tunnels. We were on the other side of the glowing sea. Before us, rising from the blasted landscape like a tombstone, was the WestTech research facility. We had made it. We had reached the heart of the plague. Now, we just had to cut it out. And I was beginning to suspect that the only tool for the job was the poison that was already inside me. WestTech was a fortress of silent, pre-war dread. The building was sealed, its metal shutters locked down, its logo a stylized atom, mocking us with the promise of a future that had ended in fire. We found a way in through a breach in the foundation, a crack leading into the lower levels, a wound in the building's concrete skin. The moment we stepped inside, we knew this place was different. The air was cold, sterile, and carried the faint, antiseptic smell of a hospital, a smell that had somehow survived 2 centuries of decay. There were no ghouls here, no raiders. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a place that had been waiting. "Where do we start?" Nate whispered, his rifle held tight against his shoulder. The darkness of the facility seemed to be pressing in on him, a stark contrast to the open, honest danger of the wasteland. "We need the FEV labs," I said. My voice sounded loud in the oppressive quiet. They would be in the most secure section, probably underground. My arm was a strange, dull ache now. The numbness had receded, replaced by a low, persistent thrum, like a machine idling just beneath my skin. The green tint was more pronounced, and I found myself keeping that hand clenched into a fist, as if I could physically stop the change from spreading. We moved through the abandoned laboratories, our flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. We saw evidence of the chaos of the final days. Overturned desks, scattered papers, a coffee mug still sitting on a console, its contents long since turned to dust, and blood. Old, dark stains on the floors and walls. Something terrible had happened here. The facility was powered by an auxiliary generator, which meant the security systems were still active. Turrets, hidden in ceiling panels, would snap online as we passed, their red targeting lasers sweeping across our chests. We learned to move slowly, to use the shadows, to disable them before they could acquire a lock. Nate, the soldier, was good at this. He could spot the subtle outline of a turret panel, the telltale scuff marks on the floor where a security robot made its patrol. He was applying his old skills to this new, quiet way of war. He was adapting. I, on the other hand, was changing. My senses felt amplified. I could hear the low-voltage hum of the turrets before we saw them. I could smell the ozone scent of a laser tripwire. My night vision was becoming unnaturally sharp. The darkness was no longer an impediment. It was an environment, and I was perfectly suited to it. The FEV was rewriting my biology. It was turning me into something more than human, a better predator, a more efficient survivor. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. We found the elevator to the sub-levels. It was, of course, offline, but the emergency stairwell was accessible behind a mag-locked door. "My turn," I said, pulling out my lockpicks. My fingers felt strange, the tips hard, almost like claws. But when I touched the lock, I felt the tumblers with a sensitivity I had never known before. It was as if I could see inside the mechanism. The lock opened in seconds. Nate just stared at me, then at my hand. He did not say anything. He did not have to. The lower levels were where the real horrors began. This was the FEV production wing. Large vats of green, glowing liquid lined the corridors, their contents bubbling slowly, rhythmically, like a sleeping heart. The air hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in my teeth. And we found the inhabitants, super mutants, but not the kind we had seen in the Commonwealth. These were bigger, smarter, more disciplined. They wore remnants of old lab coats over their massive frames. Some of them were even using terminals, their huge fingers tapping clumsily at the keyboards. They were the original strain, the masters of the FEV. We could not fight them, not here. They were too many, too strong. This had to be pure stealth, a ghost run. We moved through the labs like whispers, using the massive vats for cover. The mutants spoke to each other in low, guttural voices, a language I could not understand, but the intent was clear. They were organized. They were a community. This was not a hive. It was a city. My enhanced senses were our only advantage. I could hear their footsteps through the concrete floor. I could smell them, a rank, coppery odor from 2 rooms away. I guided us, a silent navigator in a sea of monsters. We found the main research archives, a circular room with a massive spherical computer core at its center. This was it, the sum total of WestTech's unholy knowledge. The room was guarded by a single mutant, a massive brute with a laser rifle who stood sentinel before the main terminal. There was no way past him. "I will draw him off," Nate whispered, like with the death claw. "No," I said. "He is not an animal. He is a soldier. He will not leave his post." I looked at my left hand. The transformation was almost complete. The skin was a mottled green. The fingernails had thickened into black talons. It was a monster's hand, but it was my hand. "There is only one way," I said. I looked at Nate. "Trust me." Before he could argue, I stepped out from behind our cover. I did not draw my weapon. I just walked into the center of the room. The super mutant turned, its piggish eyes widening in surprise. It raised its laser rifle, the barrel glowing with a menacing red light. I held up my hands, showing I was unarmed. Then I held up my left arm, turning it so the green, mutated flesh was clearly visible in the faint light of the computer core. The mutant paused. It tilted its head, a look of confusion on its brutish face. It looked from my arm to its own massive green hands. I had no idea if this would work. It was a wild, insane gamble based on a flicker of an idea. They were not just monsters. They were intelligent. They had a culture, What would they make of me? A human, but one who bore their mark. A bridge between two worlds. The mutant let out a low growl. It took a step towards me, its rifle still raised. I stood my ground, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. It spoke. The voice was a gravelly roar, but the words were in English. "What are you?" "I am changing," I said, my voice steady. "I am sick. I came here for a cure." The mutant let out a harsh barking laugh. "Cure? There is no cure. There is only the change, the gift of the master." It lowered its rifle slightly. It was not going to shoot me. It was curious. "You are small," it grunted, circling me. "Weak, but the green is in you. Soon you will be strong. You will be one of us." "I do not want to be one of you," I said. The mutant stopped in front of me, its face inches from mine. Its breath smelled like rotten meat. "You have no choice. The green decides." It reached out a huge, three-fingered hand and grabbed my mutated arm. Its grip was like iron. It inspected the limb, turning it over, its eyes narrowed in concentration. "This is not the master's work," it rumbled. "It is different, unfinished, flawed." It looked at me with something like contempt. "You are a mistake." It shoved me back, disgust on its face. It raised its rifle again. Mistakes must be erased. This was it. The gamble had failed. But in that moment, as the rifle barrel began to glow, Nate acted. He had been circling the room from the other direction, using my conversation as the ultimate diversion. He was a perfect shadow, a ghost in the machine. He opened fire, not with a loud, booming rifle, but with something new. A syringer rifle, a weapon we had salvaged from an old clinic. He had loaded it with a cocktail of chemicals we had found in one of the labs, a powerful animal tranquilizer. The dart hit the super mutant in the thick muscle of its neck. It roared, more in surprise than pain, and spun around trying to find its attacker. I did not waste the opportunity. I lunged forward, my combat knife in my good hand. But as I moved, something else happened. My left hand, the monster hand, shot out, moving with a speed and strength that was not my own. My talons, hard as steel, sank into the mutant's exposed side, tearing through its tough hide. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony, and stumbled back. It dropped its rifle, clutching at the deep bleeding gashes in its side. Nate fired another tranquilizer dart, this one hitting it in the chest. The mutant swayed, its massive body starting to shut down. It looked at me, its eyes filled with a strange, new expression. Not anger, not hatred. It was respect. "Strong," it gurgled as its knees buckled. "You will be strong." It collapsed onto the floor, unconscious, but alive. We stood there, breathing heavily, the silence of the room rushing back in. Nate came over to me, his eyes on my left hand, which was dripping with green, viscous blood. "Silas," he started to say. "I know," I said, cutting him off. I looked at the hand, at the power it contained. It had saved us. The poison was also the weapon. "Let's find what we came for," I said, turning to the terminal. We spent the next hour sifting through the archives. The truth, when we found it, was worse than I could have imagined. There was no cure for the FEV, not a real one. The virus was too aggressive, too adaptable. It bonded with the host's DNA, rewriting it completely. The process was irreversible, but there was something else. A counter-agent, a treatment developed by one of the WestTech scientists, a woman named Dr. Marion Copeland, who had realized the horror of what they had created. It was not a cure. It would not reverse the changes, but it would halt them. It would neutralize the virus, stopping the mutation in its tracks leaving the host in a stable but permanently altered state. The formula was there, on the screen. The components were complex, but most of them could be found here, in the labs. "I can make this," Nate said, his voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He had been a soldier, a leader, a student. Now he was a scientist, a medic. He was whatever he needed to be. We had the formula, but we still needed one final critical component, a sample of the original, unmodified FEV, the one stored in the vats, to synthesize a stable catalyst. That meant going deeper, into the heart of the facility, the FEV production chamber. "It will be heavily guarded," Nate said. "I know," I said. I looked at my monstrous hand. "But they are not expecting me." I was no longer just a thief. I was something else, something new, a hybrid, a mistake, and I was going to use that mistake to save my own life. The FEV production chamber was a cathedral of horrors, a vast multi-leveled cavern of steel and glass, dominated by 4 colossal vats that reached up into the darkness like the pillars of some unholy temple. The green liquid inside them pulsed with a soft internal light, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the gantries and catwalks that crisscrossed the chamber. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the coppery scent of the virus. This was the source, the wellspring of all the super mutants in the wasteland, and it was crawling with them. They patrolled the catwalks, they monitored consoles, they worked with a quiet, focused intensity that was far more terrifying than the mindless rage of their devolved cousins. We stood on a high gantry, hidden in the shadows, looking down at the scene. It was an army, an organized, intelligent, technologically advanced army. The Commonwealth was not just fighting scattered bands of greenskins. It was facing a nascent civilization. "This is impossible," Nate breathed, his eyes wide. "We would need a full battalion to take this place." "We are not taking it," I said. "We are stealing from it." My plan was simple and insane. He would create a diversion, a big one, something to draw the attention of every mutant in the chamber. While they were distracted, I would descend to the main control level, access the VAT controls, and extract a sample of the raw FEV. Then we would disappear before they knew what had happened. It was our old dynamic, but inverted. He would be the noise, I would be the silence. "What kind of diversion?" he asked. I pointed to a series of large red pipes running along the ceiling. "Those are coolant lines for the main reactor. According to the schematics, there is a primary control valve on the far side of the chamber. If you were to, say, overload the pressure, it would trigger a full-scale reactor alert. Alarms, flashing lights, containment protocols. It would be loud." He looked at the distance, at the dozens of mutants between us and the valve. "That is a suicide run." "No," I said. "It is a soldier's run. You know how to do this. Move fast, hit hard, get out. You taught me that." He looked at me, a flicker of the old general in his eyes. He understood. This was his part to play. "And you," he asked, "can you do your part?" I held up my left hand. In the green glow of the vats, it looked more alien than ever. "They will not be looking for me," I said. "They will be looking for a human." We synchronized our chronometers, a relic of his old military life that he had insisted we use. We would have exactly 5 minutes from the moment the alarm sounded. 5 minutes to get the sample and get out. He gave me a single, sharp nod. Then he was gone, a shadow moving along the gantry, disappearing into the industrial gloom. I was alone. I watched him go, a man running towards his probable death for my sake. The weight of that was heavier than any armor. I waited. The minutes stretched out, each second a lifetime. I watched the mutants below, going about their business, oblivious. I felt a strange connection to them. The green in my blood was a whisper of their own. I was their kin, in a way. Their flawed, broken little brother. Then it happened. A loud, metallic clang echoed from the far side of the chamber, followed by a shout of alarm from one of the mutants. Then the sound of rifle fire. Nate had been spotted, but it was too late. A moment later, a deafening klaxon began to blare. Red lights bathed the entire chamber in a hellish glow. A synthesized voice, calm and detached, echoed from the speakers. Reactor coolant pressure critical. Containment failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Chaos erupted. The mutants, for all their intelligence, were thrown into a panic. They shouted, they ran, they abandoned their posts. Their attention focused entirely on the source of the alarm and the single distant figure of a human soldier, who was now retreating back towards the upper levels, drawing them after him. The diversion was working. It was my time. I moved. I did not climb down ladders. I jumped, dropping from one gantry to the next, my body light, my movements fluid. The FEV was not just changing my arm, it was changing everything. I was faster, stronger, more agile than I had ever been. I landed on the main control platform, a circle of metal suspended in the center of the chamber. The terminal for controlling the vats was right in front of me. Only one mutant remained, a technician who was frantically trying to override the shutdown sequence. He turned as I approached, his face a mask of rage. "You, the little green one, you did this," he charged, forgoing a weapon, relying on his sheer brute strength. I did not retreat. I met his charge. When he swung a massive fist at my head, I ducked under it, the blow whistling past my ear. I moved in close, inside his reach. My left hand, my monster hand, shot out. I did not aim for his flesh. I aimed for the thick hoses that connected his rebreather to the tank on his back. My talons sliced through the rubberized tubes as if they were paper. There was a hiss of escaping air. The mutant's eyes widened in panic. He, Echui, clawed at his mask, choking. He was dependent on a specific mixture of air, a product of his altered biology. I had just taken it away from him. He staggered back, gasping, and collapsed, his body convulsing. I had not killed him. I had just disabled him. I turned to the terminal. The klaxon was still blaring, a frantic rhythmic pulse. My 5 minutes were ticking away. I accessed the system. The controls were complex, but the language of technology was one I understood. I initiated a sample extraction sequence from Vat Alpha, the primary source. A robotic arm descended into the glowing green liquid, a sterile vial at its tip. 2 minutes to reactor core exposure, the synthesized voice announced. The arm retracted, the vial now filled with the pure, concentrated source of my affliction. It was beautiful and terrible, a tiny container of liquid that held the power to reshape the world. The vial was deposited into a shielded dispensary slot. I grabbed it, the lead-lined container cool in my hand. I had it. Now I had to get out. I could not go back the way I came. The upper levels were swarming with mutants, all of them hunting for Nate. I had to find another way. I saw it. A waste disposal chute, its hatch slightly ajar. According to the schematics on the terminal, it led down to the lower levels, to the sewers and drainage systems beneath the facility. It was a filthy, disgusting one-way trip. It was perfect. 1 minute to reactor core exposure. I ran for the chute. I could hear the mutants returning, their heavy footsteps pounding on the metal catwalks above. They had realized the diversion was a trick. I wrenched the hatch open and threw myself inside, just as the first laser blast stitched across the spot where I had been standing. I slid down a long, dark tube, the world a blur of rushing metal, and was ejected into a pool of stagnant, foul-smelling water. I was clear. I was out. I found Nate an hour later in the drainage tunnels, following the emergency escape route we had agreed upon. He was battered, bruised, his rifle gone, but he was alive. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice a ragged gasp. I held up the vial. He slumped against the wall, a wave of relief washing over him. "I did not think I was going to make it out of there," he admitted. "They were everywhere." "You did your part, General," I said. "You made some noise." He looked at me, a real, genuine smile on his face. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I am good at that." We made our way out of the facility and back into the wasteland. We had the formula. We had the catalyst. We had everything we needed to stop the change. But as I walked, I could feel the power still thrumming in my veins. The strength, the speed, the senses. The FEV had almost killed me, but it had also made me into something more. Something better suited to this broken world. And a small, treacherous part of me, a whisper from the green in my blood, asked a terrible question. Did I really want to be cured? The synthesis of the counter-agent was a delicate, nerve-wracking process. We set up a makeshift laboratory in a fortified red rocket station we found, miles from WestTech. Nate, it turned out, had a surprising aptitude for chemistry. He worked with a fierce, focused energy. His hands, which had once only known the weight of a rifle, now deftly handling beakers and titration tubes. He was a man trying to outrun his own guilt, to build my salvation with his own two hands. I was his assistant and his test subject. My role was to provide blood samples, to sit still while he monitored my vital signs, to describe the strange, shifting sensations of my own biology, and to fight. The FEV did not want to be stopped. As we got closer to completing the formula, the virus in my system seemed to react, to fight back. The muscle spasms grew more violent. I was plagued by strange, feverish dreams, visions of a green, perfect world, a world where the strong survived and the weak were simply absorbed. I would wake up, my heart pounding, the whispers of the hive mind of the mutants still echoing in my skull. My left arm was now almost useless for delicate tasks, a clawed, monstrous thing that I kept wrapped in rags, but it possessed a brutal, inhuman strength. One day, a piece of heavy equipment we were using to barricade the door slipped. It was a solid steel generator, weighing hundreds of pounds. It was about to crush Nate's foot. Without thinking, I shot out my left hand and caught it. I held it there, my arm not even straining, the muscles in my shoulder bunching like steel cables. Nate just stared at me, his face pale. I put the generator down, gently. The moment passed in silence. We both knew what we were seeing. The poison was also the power. The temptation was a constant, insidious whisper. Why stop this? Why go back to being a normal, fragile human in a world that devoured the weak? With this power, I could be a king. I could be a god. The wasteland would bend its knee to me. But then I would look at Nate, his face etched with worry and exhaustion, working tirelessly for my sake. He was fighting for my humanity, not for my strength, not for my survival, but for the man I was. He was fighting for Silas, the thief from the gutter, not for the monster I was becoming. That was the anchor. That was the thing that kept me from succumbing to the green whispers, his faith in me. After 3 days of non-stop work, it was ready. A single syringe filled with a clear blue liquid, The cure, or rather, the stopgap, the pause button. "This is it," Nate said, his voice heavy. He held the syringe in his hand as if it were a holy relic. "According to Copeland's notes, the effect should be almost immediate. It will neutralize the active FEV in your system. The mutation will stop, but the existing changes will be permanent." I looked at my left arm. It would be a part of me forever. Permanent reminder of what I had been and what I could have become. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. I was not sure if I was, but there was no turning back now. I sat on a stool, and he knelt before me. He took my right arm, my human arm, and found a vein. His hands were steady. "This might hurt," he said. He slid the needle in and slowly, deliberately, pushed the plunger. I watched the blue liquid disappear into my bloodstream. The effect was not immediate. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the pain hit. It was a fire, a white-hot, cleansing fire that erupted in my veins and spread through my entire body. It felt like every cell was being torn apart and remade. The FEV was not dying quietly. It was screaming. I cried out, my body arching in agony. I fell from the stool, convulsing on the grimy floor of the garage. My vision went white. The world dissolved into a sea of pure, undiluted pain. Through the haze, I could hear Nate's voice, calling my name, trying to keep me grounded. I could feel his hands on my shoulders, holding me down, keeping me from injuring myself. The battle raged inside me. I could feel the two forces, the blue and the green, tearing my biology apart. I was the battlefield. I was the prize. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The pain receded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. My body was limp. My mind was clear. The whispers were gone. I lay on the floor, gasping for air. The silence in my head was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Silas." Nate's voice was filled with a desperate hope. "Are you—" I opened my eyes. The world looked normal again. The colors were just colors. The sounds were just sounds. The heightened predatory edge was gone. I sat up slowly, my body aching. I looked at my left hand. It was still a monster's hand, green, clawed, inhuman. But the faint inner glow was gone. The unnatural pulsing had stopped. It was just flesh, scar tissue, a remnant of the war that had been fought inside me. I flexed the fingers. They moved. They obeyed my commands. But the brutal, effortless strength was diminished. It was still stronger than a normal arm, but it was no longer the limb of a god. It was just a part of me. "It worked," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It is over." Nate fell back, sitting on the floor, a wave of emotion washing over his face. Relief, exhaustion, triumph. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long, shaky breath. "Thank God," he said. We sat there for a long time, in the quiet of the red rocket. Two survivors in the aftermath of a war no one else would ever know about. We had gone to the edge of the abyss, and we had pulled each other back. The journey back to the Commonwealth was different. The urgency was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. We were no longer running from something. We were walking towards something, a future. My body slowly recovered its strength. The monster within had been tamed, but it had left its mark. I was no longer the man I had been. I was something new, a hybrid of human and mutant, a living testament to the strange, violent world we lived in. My left arm was a constant reminder, a tool and a burden. It was ugly, and it drew stares, but it was also strong, and more than once on the journey home, Its power saved us from raiders or wasteland creatures. The biggest change, however, was in our partnership. The lies were gone. The delusions were gone. All that was left was a foundation of hard-won, absolute trust. We moved as one, a seamless unit. He was the soldier, the strategist. I was the scout, the ghost. He saw the big picture. I saw the details in the shadows. We were two halves of a whole. When we finally returned to the castle, weeks after we had left, the reception was one of confusion and relief. They had thought us dead. Preston Garvey hugged us both, his usual worry replaced by a profound joy. Nate did not tell them the whole truth. He did not tell them about WestTech or the FEV or the cure. That was our secret, a burden we would share forever. He just said we had run into some trouble and had to take the long way home. He looked at my arm, at the rags that I still kept it wrapped in. And Silas was wounded, he said, his voice firm. He paid a heavy price, but he is a hero. We all owe him our lives. He was giving me a story, a legend to cover the truth. He was protecting me, just as I had once protected him. In the days that followed, the general changed. He still used the power armor, but not for everything. He would walk the battlements in his vault suit, talking to his people, listening. He learned to trust them, to delegate. He was still their leader, their symbol of strength. But he was also a man again. He would still call on me for the quiet missions, the ones that required a delicate touch. But now, when we planned them together. He would lay out the strategy, and I would point out the flaws, the acoustic dead zones, the blind spots. He would listen. He would adapt. One evening, he found me on the battlements, looking out at the ruins of the city. He was not wearing his armor. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about what we are building here." I waited. "This world does not need another man in a suit of armor, acting like a king," he said. "It needs something more. It needs intelligence. It needs finesse." He looked at me. "It needs a ghost, a whisper, someone to handle the things that cannot be solved with a minigun." He was creating a new role, a new position, spy master, head of intelligence, the man in the shadows. "The Minutemen need a leader," he said, "but that leader needs a partner, someone to tell him the truth, someone to see the things he cannot." He was offering me a permanent place at his side, not as his subordinate, not as his enabler, as his equal. I looked at my left hand, unwrapping the rags. The green clawed thing was a part of me, a symbol of the lies and the pain, but also of the strength we had found. It was my truth. "What about the noise?" I asked, a faint smile on my face. He smiled back. "I am learning to like the quiet," he said. "But sometimes you still need a little thunder to remind them you are there." He clapped me on my good shoulder, a gesture between friends, equals. The whine of his armor would still echo across the Commonwealth on occasion. The thunder of his footsteps would still shake the foundations of raider camps. But it was different now. It was no longer the sound of a man hiding from the world. It was the sound of a deliberate choice, a tool used wisely. And whenever that thunder rolled, I would be there, moving ahead of it, not as damage control, not as an enabler, but as the lightning that chose where the storm would strike. We were a team, and we were just getting started.